On my 78th birthday, I woke up and didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. At first, I thought it was the light. Morning sun has a way of softening things, blurring edges, making everything feel a little less real. But when I raised my hand and touched my face, my fingers didn't meet what they had known for 78 years. There was nothing where my eyebrows should have been. My scalp felt wrong too. Too smooth in places, uneven in others. I sat there for a long moment, not breathing, not thinking, just feeling the absence. Then I stood up slowly and walked toward the mirror across the room. The woman staring back at me looked erased. Not hurt, not injured, just altered. Deliberately, carefully. I didn't scream. I didn't call out. I simply stood there, taking it in, letting the silence settle around me like it always had in this house. Because I already knew one thing with absolute certainty. This hadn't happened by accident. I turned slightly, scanning the room. Nothing looked disturbed. My dresser was still neat, the chair by the window untouched, the door closed just as I always left it. Whoever had done this hadn't rushed. They had taken their time. And that told me something else. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't confusion. This was intention. I walked to the door and opened it, my hands steady even though my thoughts were beginning to sharpen into something colder. The hallway smelled faintly of coffee. That meant Ashley was already awake. She always woke early, liked to have everything just so before Daniel came downstairs. I paused for a second listening. Dishes clinked softly in the kitchen. Low voices. Calm. Normal. As if nothing had changed. As if I hadn't just woken up to find pieces of myself quietly removed in the night. I stepped into the hallway and moved toward the stairs, each step slow, deliberate. I wasn't rushing anymore. I wasn't confused anymore. Something inside me had already shifted, settling into place like a decision I hadn't realized I'd made. By the time I reached the bottom step, I could see them. Daniel sat at the table, scrolling through his phone. Ashley stood by the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs, her posture relaxed, her movements precise. She glanced up when she heard me, and for just a fraction of a second, something flickered across her face. Not surprise, not concern, something else, something quieter, something that didn't belong in a normal morning. I stopped a few feet from the table. I didn't touch my face. I didn't look away. I simply stood there, letting them see me exactly as I was. Daniel looked up next, his eyes landing on me, then holding. He didn't speak. Neither did she. The silence stretched between us, thin but unbreakable. And in that silence, I understood something I should have seen long ago. This hadn't started last night. It had only revealed itself. I tilted my head slightly, my voice calm when I finally spoke. Which one of you came into my room? Daniel was the first to look away. It was a small movement, almost nothing, but I noticed it because I had spent years noticing the smallest changes in him. Ashley, on the other hand, did not move at all. She set the coffee mug down with quiet precision, wiped her hands on a dish towel, and leaned lightly against the counter as if this were just another morning, as if I had asked her whether she preferred cream or sugar. I do not know what you are talking about, Margaret, she said, her voice smooth, practiced, almost gentle. Not a single word out of place. Daniel cleared his throat, shifting in his chair, finally meeting my eyes again, but only briefly. Mom, maybe you should sit down, he added, his tone careful, measured in a way that felt rehearsed. I did not move. I did not sit. I simply stood there, letting their words settle in the air between us, testing them, weighing them. My eyebrows are gone, I said quietly. My hair has been cut while I was asleep. So I will ask again. Which one of you came into my room? Ashley tilted her head slightly, the faintest hint of a smile touching her lips, but it did not reach her eyes. Margaret, she said, at your age, things can happen. Sometimes people do things and do not remember. It is nothing to be ashamed of. The sentence was soft, almost kind, but there it was. The shift, the suggestion, not denial, not outrage, just a quiet redirection, as if the problem was not what had been done, but what I was capable of forgetting. I felt something inside me go very still. Daniel nodded slowly, as if her explanation made sense to him, as if it offered him a place to stand that did not require choosing a side. You have been under a lot of stress lately, he added. The doctor did say your sleep has been irregular. Maybe you got up in the night, and he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. I watched him for a moment, studying the way he avoided looking directly at my face now. The way his fingers tapped lightly against the table as if he needed something to hold on to. This was not confusion. This was distance. Carefully maintained distance. So you are telling me, I said, my voice still even, that I did this to myself. Ashley shrugged lightly, as if she were offering a reasonable possibility. We are just saying there could be an explanation that is not what you are implying. What I was implying. I let that settle. Not what had happened. Not what had been done. Just what I was implying. I nodded once, slowly, as if I were considering her words. As if I were giving them the benefit of the doubt. Of course, I said. That must be it. Daniel's shoulders relaxed just slightly, the tension leaving him in a way he probably did not even notice. Ashley reached for her coffee, lifting it with steady hands, her posture loosening as if the moment had passed, as if the question had been answered. I turned then, without another word, and walked back toward the stairs. I did not rush. I did not look back. But I could feel it. The shift behind me. The quiet exhale. The assumption that the situation had been contained. That I had accepted their explanation. That I would return to my room, close the door, and let the morning continue as if nothing had happened. By the time I reached the top of the stairs, I knew two things with complete certainty. First, I had not done this to myself. And second, they needed me to believe that I had. I stepped back into my room and closed the door gently behind me. The mirror still waited where I had left it, reflecting a version of me that felt unfamiliar but not broken. Just altered. I walked past it this time and went straight to my nightstand. Picking up my phone. It had been moved. Not much. Just enough that I noticed. The angle was wrong. The charging cable slightly twisted. Small details, easy to miss unless you knew exactly how things were supposed to be. I opened the screen and scrolled quietly, my expression unchanged, my breathing steady. I did not need confirmation anymore. I needed proof. Because whatever had happened in this house last night, it had not been careless. It had been planned. And people who plan things like that rarely stop after one attempt. I sat down on the edge of my bed, holding my phone in both hands, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to feel something steady. The room was quiet again, just the faint hum of the air vent and the distant clink of dishes downstairs. Normal sounds. Ordinary sounds. That was what made everything feel wrong. I opened the settings first, not the messages, not the calls. The settings. People rarely think about what they leave behind in the background. I scrolled slowly, my fingers calm, my eyes sharper than they had been in years. There it was. The screen activity log. A small detail. Easy to overlook. My phone had been unlocked at 2:14 in the morning. I was asleep at that time. I always was. I do not wake in the middle of the night. Not anymore. Not since I learned to value rest over worry. I stared at the timestamp for a moment, then continued scrolling. Several applications had been opened. The camera, the gallery, even the settings menu itself. Someone had been careful, curious, or maybe both. I placed the phone down gently on the nightstand and looked around the room again, but this time not as a victim, not as someone searching for answers. I looked as someone who was being studied. The chair by the window was angled slightly differently than I remembered, just a few inches, enough to suggest someone had sat there, watching, waiting. I stood up and walked over to it, running my fingers lightly along the fabric. Smooth. No wrinkles. Whoever had been there had not stayed long, or they had been careful enough to leave no trace. I turned toward the dresser next. The top drawer was not fully closed. Again, not obvious. Not messy. Just imperfect. I opened it slowly and looked inside. My personal things were still there. Folded. Undisturbed. Except for one thing. My small pair of grooming scissors was missing. I did not react. I did not sigh or shake my head. I simply closed the drawer and stepped back. Everything in this room told the same story. Not chaos. Not confusion. Control. Someone had come in, done exactly what they intended to do, and left without panic. Without fear. That meant they felt safe. Safe enough to take their time. Safe enough to believe there would be no consequences. I walked back to the mirror then, stopping just short of it this time. I did not need to look again. I already knew what I would see. Instead, I focused on something else. Memory. The night before. I let it replay slowly, piece by piece, like a film I had watched without paying attention the first time. The dinner table. The candles Daniel insisted on lighting, even though I had told him it was unnecessary. Ashley moving around the kitchen, smiling just enough to appear pleasant, but never quite enough to feel genuine. And then there was that moment. Small, quiet, easy to dismiss. She had stood across from me, holding a plate, her eyes lingering on my face just a second too long. Not admiring, not kind, evaluating, measuring. Some people do not know when it is time to let go of how they used to look, she had said, her voice light, almost playful. I had smiled then, a polite smile, the kind you give when you choose peace over confrontation. But now, standing in this room, I understood something I had missed. That was not a comment. That was a decision spoken out loud. I let out a slow breath, not from fear, not from sadness, but from clarity. This had not started this morning. It had not even started last night. It had been building, quietly, patiently, and I had allowed it, not because I was weak, but because I believed in something they no longer respected. I picked up my phone again, this time opening the camera application. I checked the recently deleted folder. Empty. Of course. That was expected. But not everything disappears cleanly. Not if you know where to look. And for the first time in a very long time, I realized I was not the one at a disadvantage. I was simply the one who had not been paying attention. Until now. I did not search for more proof that morning. I already had enough to understand the shape of what I was dealing with. Instead, I sat down again and let the past come back to me, not as memories filled with warmth, but as pieces of a pattern I had refused to see. It is a strange thing, how the mind protects itself. It softens sharp edges. It rewrites tone. It convinces you that something uncomfortable is just a misunderstanding. I had done that for years. I had chosen comfort over clarity. But now, sitting in that quiet room, I let every moment return exactly as it had been. The first time Ashley corrected the way I dressed for a family dinner, smiling as she said, "We just want everything to look modern." The way Daniel had laughed it off, telling me not to take it personally. The small changes in the house, furniture moved without asking, pictures replaced, my things gradually shifted into less visible places. Always subtle, always explainable, always easy to dismiss if you did not want to see the intention behind it. I stood up and walked slowly toward the closet, opening it just enough to look inside. My coats were still there, but pushed slightly to one side, as if making room for something else. I had noticed that before, weeks ago, but I had told myself it was nothing. Just convenience. Just shared space. I closed the closet again, my hand steady on the handle. This was never about space. It was about presence. About who belonged and who did not. I moved back toward the bed and sat down once more, folding my hands in my lap. The house had changed, but not all at once. It had been done gradually, carefully, like someone adjusting the temperature of a room degree by degree until you no longer noticed the difference. And I had adapted. I had made myself smaller, quieter, easier to accommodate, because that is what I believed a mother should do when her son builds a life of his own. You step back. You support. You do not interfere. But there is a difference between stepping back and being moved aside. I understood that now. Completely. I picked up my phone again and opened the calendar. My appointments. My routines. Everything was still there, but something caught my attention. A reminder had been deleted. One I did not remember removing. I searched for it, checking the history, and found a small trace. A meeting I had planned 2 weeks ago with my bank. I had canceled it, or at least that was what the system showed. But I had no memory of doing that. I stared at the screen for a long moment, feeling something settle deeper inside me. This was not just about humiliation. This was not just about control over how I looked. This was about access, about decisions, about shaping my life without my consent. I placed the phone back down and leaned slightly forward, resting my elbows on my knees. They had not acted out of impulse. They had prepared. They had observed me long enough to know what I would question and what I would ignore. And they had counted on something very specific, that I would doubt myself before I doubted them. I let out a slow breath, my gaze fixed on the floor. That was their mistake, because I had spent 78 years learning the difference between confusion and truth. And this was not confusion. I stood up again, smoothing the front of my sweater as if I were about to step out for an ordinary day. There was no rush in my movements, no tension, just a quiet sense of direction forming, one step at a time. If they believed this morning would end with me questioning my own mind, then they had already underestimated me. And people who underestimate you tend to reveal more than they intend to. I walked toward the door, pausing just before I opened it, my hand resting lightly against the wood. I did not feel anger. Not yet. What I felt was something far more useful. Awareness. And with awareness comes patience. I opened the door and stepped back into the hallway, ready to see not what they wanted me to see, but what they had tried so carefully to hide. I walked into the kitchen as if nothing had changed, as if the morning had unfolded exactly the way they expected it to. Ashley was standing by the sink now, rinsing a cup that did not need rinsing, her movements precise, controlled. Daniel had shifted in his chair, his phone set aside, his attention suddenly more present than it had been earlier. They both looked up when I entered, but this time, I did not stop at a distance. I moved past them slowly, deliberately, reaching for the cabinet where the glasses were kept. My reflection caught faintly in the polished surface of the microwave door, distorted but still unmistakable. I did not linger on it. I poured myself a glass of water, my hands steady, my posture relaxed. "Did you sleep well?" Ashley asked lightly, as if we were discussing the weather, as if the morning had not already drawn a line between us that could not be erased. I took a small sip before answering. "Well enough," I said. My voice did not carry accusation. It did not carry emotion. It simply existed. Daniel watched me closely now, as if trying to read something in my expression, something that would tell him whether he was safe. That was new. He had not watched me like that in years. I set the glass down and turned slightly toward the counter, placing my hand near the edge, grounding myself in the ordinary details of the room. The coffee maker hummed softly. The clock above the stove read 8:17 a.m. Everything looked exactly as it always had, but now I could see the structure underneath it. The careful balance. The quiet rearrangement of control. "I was thinking," I said after a moment, my tone casual, almost reflective. "It might be time for me to review a few things. My accounts. My schedule. Just to stay organized." Ashley's hand paused for half a second over the dish towel, before continuing as if nothing had happened. "That sounds like a good idea," she replied smoothly. "It is always important to stay on top of those things." Her voice did not change, but something in her posture did. A slight tightening. A shift in weight. Daniel glanced at her, then back at me, his expression neutral, but his shoulders no longer relaxed. I let the silence stretch just long enough to be noticed, then reached for my glass again. "I had an appointment with the bank recently," I continued, as if recalling it casually. Or at least, I thought I did. "It seems I canceled it." Daniel frowned slightly. "You probably just forgot," he said quickly. Too quickly. Ashley set the cup down and turned to face me. Fully now, her expression composed, her eyes steady. "It happens," she added. "Sometimes things slip through." I nodded once, slowly, as if their explanations fit neatly into place. As if everything made sense. "Of course," I said. "It happens." I took another sip of water, then set the glass down again with quiet precision. "Still," I added, "I think I will reschedule. It is important to keep everything clear." This time, neither of them responded immediately. The air shifted again, subtle but undeniable. Not tension. Not yet. But awareness. They were listening differently now, measuring their responses, watching me more carefully than before. Good. I turned away from them then, moving toward the small drawer beside the refrigerator where we kept spare keys and loose papers. I opened it without hesitation, scanning its contents briefly. Everything appeared in order, but I was no longer looking for obvious signs. I was looking for patterns, for absence, for the things that should have been there and were not. I closed the drawer and rested my hand lightly on the counter, my back still to them. "I think I will go out later," I said, my voice calm. "Take care of a few things myself." Daniel shifted in his chair again. "Do you want me to drive you?" he asked. There it was. The offer. Not out of kindness. Out of proximity. Control disguised as help. I shook my head gently. "No," I said. "I would prefer to go alone." The silence that followed was different this time. Heavier. Not because of what I had said, but because of what it meant. I turned back to face them, meeting their eyes one at a time, not with accusation, not with anger, but with something far more unsettling. Clarity. "It is important," I added quietly, "to handle certain things personally." Ashley held my gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then smiled. A small, controlled smile. "Of course," she said. But her eyes did not agree. And in that moment, I knew something had shifted again. Not in the house. Not in them. In me. Because I was no longer reacting to what they did. I was preparing for what they would do next. The rest of the morning moved quietly, almost too quietly, as if the house itself had adjusted to a new rhythm I had not yet learned. I stayed in the kitchen just long enough to make my presence feel ordinary, then stepped away without explanation, moving through the hallway with the same calm, measured pace. I could feel their attention behind me, not following, but listening, waiting. That was fine. Let them wait. I entered the living room and paused near the window, looking out at the driveway. My car was still there, exactly where I had left it the day before. No changes, no signs of interference. That told me something important. Whatever they had done, they had kept it inside the house, inside my space. I turned slightly and let my eyes move across the room, taking in details I had seen 1,000 times before but never truly examined. The bookshelf, the framed photographs, the small decorative pieces Ashley had introduced over the past year, each one subtle, each one replacing something older, something that had once belonged to me. I walked toward the shelf and picked up one of the frames, holding it just long enough to notice that the photo inside had been changed. Not removed, not replaced entirely, just swapped for a different version. Same people, same smiles. But I was standing slightly farther from Daniel in this one. A small difference, easy to overlook, unless you were looking for patterns. I set the frame back down exactly where I found it and stepped away. This was not about removing me. Not yet. This was about repositioning me, redefining my place in a way that felt natural, gradual, unquestioned. I moved toward the hallway again, this time heading for the small office near the back of the house. It used to be Daniel's study, but over time, it had become a shared space, though I noticed I used it less and less. I opened the door and stepped inside, closing it gently behind me. The desk was clean. Too clean. Papers stacked neatly. Pens aligned. A computer screen dark, but recently used. I walked over and pressed the power button, waiting as it came to life. No password prompt. That was careless. Or intentional. I sat down slowly, my hands resting lightly on the desk as I looked at the screen. The browser was still open. Several tabs. Banking. Email. Documents. I did not touch anything at first. I simply observed. The account name at the top of the page was mine. Not Daniel's. Not Ashley's. Mine. That told me everything I needed to know about access. I moved the cursor carefully, opening the recent activity section. Transfers. Scheduled payments. Adjustments. Small ones. Not enough to draw attention. Not enough to trigger concern. But consistent. Controlled. I leaned back slightly in the chair, letting the realization settle in without changing my expression. This was not a single act. This was a system. And systems do not collapse because you react. They collapse because you understand them. I closed the browser without making any changes and stood up, smoothing my hands over the surface of the desk as if I had never touched anything at all. Then I noticed it. A small device, barely visible near the edge of the shelf. A camera, not hidden well enough to disappear, but positioned just right to observe the room. To observe me. I looked at it for a moment, not with shock, not with fear, but with recognition. Of course, observation works both ways. I stepped back, turning toward the door, my movements calm, unhurried. If they were watching, then they would see exactly what I wanted them to see. Nothing. No reaction. No suspicion. Just routine. I opened the door and stepped back into the hallway, closing it softly behind me. And as I walked back toward the front of the house, I understood something with absolute clarity. They believed they were controlling the situation because they were watching me. But what they did not realize was that I had already begun watching them. I did not leave the house that afternoon. Not because I could not, but because leaving too soon would have given them space. Space to adjust. Space to correct whatever I had already seen. Instead, I stayed exactly where they expected me to be, moving through the house with the same quiet routine I had followed for years. Familiarity is a powerful disguise. People stop looking closely when they believe they already understand you. I spent the next hour in the living room, sitting in my usual chair near the window, a book open in my lap that I did not read. My eyes followed the lines on the page, but my attention remained elsewhere, tracking the sounds around me. Footsteps in the kitchen, the opening and closing of cabinets. Ashley's voice, low and controlled, speaking to Daniel in tones just quiet, enough to avoid being fully heard. But silence carries its own meaning, and I was listening for that. At one point, their voices stopped completely. Not faded. Stopped. That kind of silence does not happen naturally. It happens when people realize they are being overheard. I turned a page in my book, slowly, deliberately, giving them exactly what they needed to believe. That I was unaware. That I was still operating within the version of reality they had created for me. A few minutes later, footsteps approached. Ashley entered the living room with a soft smile, her posture relaxed, her presence carefully composed. "I made some tea," she said, placing a cup on the table beside me. "Chamomile. It helps with stress." I looked up at her, meeting her eyes briefly before glancing down at the cup. Steam rose gently from the surface. Calm. Controlled. Like everything else in this house. "Thank you," I said. My voice remained even. No hesitation. No suspicion. She lingered for a moment, as if expecting something more. A question. A reaction. But I gave her nothing. After a second, she nodded slightly and stepped away, returning to the kitchen. I waited until her footsteps faded before reaching for the cup. I did not drink it. I simply held it, feeling the warmth against my hands, grounding myself in something tangible. Then I set it back down, untouched. Across the room, the television reflected faintly in the glass of a framed picture. And in that reflection, I caught something small but important. Movement. Not in the room. On the screen of a device. I shifted my gaze just enough to see it more clearly without turning my head. The reflection showed the hallway behind me. And for a brief moment, I saw Daniel standing there, his phone raised slightly, angled toward the living room. Toward me. Recording. I turned another page in my book, my expression unchanged, my posture relaxed. So that was it. Not just observation. Documentation. They were not only watching me. They were collecting something. Evidence. Of what? I did not yet know. But it did not matter. Because now I understood the full shape of it. The camera in the office. The access to my accounts. The subtle changes in my environment. And now this. A narrative was being built. Quietly. Carefully. Piece by piece. I closed the book gently and set it aside, reaching for my phone as if I were checking the time. My fingers moved naturally across the screen, opening the notes application, typing without looking directly at it. Simple observations. Times. Details. Nothing dramatic. Just facts. Because facts do not change when stories do. I placed the phone back in my lap and leaned back in the chair, my gaze drifting toward the window once more. Outside, everything looked normal. The same quiet street. The same stillness. But inside this house, something else was unfolding. And for the first time, I was not reacting to it. I was documenting it. I let my eyes close for a brief moment, not out of fatigue, but out of focus. Because clarity does not come from rushing. It comes from seeing everything exactly as it is. And what I saw now was not just control. It was preparation. They were preparing for something bigger than this morning. Something that required proof. Something that required me to appear exactly the way they needed me to appear. I opened my eyes again, my expression unchanged, my breathing steady. If they wanted a performance, then I would give them one. But not the one they expected. Because while they were building their version of the story, I had already begun building mine. And the difference between the two would only become clear when it was too late for them to change it. By late afternoon, the house had settled into a quiet that felt almost rehearsed. Not peaceful, not natural, but arranged. I remained in the same chair longer than usual, long enough for them to stop checking on me as frequently, long enough for their attention to loosen just a fraction. That was all I needed. People reveal more when they believe you have returned to your old patterns. I let my shoulders relax slightly, my gaze soften, my movements slow just enough to suggest fatigue. Not weakness, just enough age to make their assumptions comfortable again. At some point, Ashley passed through the living room without stopping, her phone in her hand, her expression focused on something that was not me. That alone was a change. Earlier, she had watched me carefully. Now, she was dividing her attention. That meant she felt more secure. That meant she believed the situation was under control. I stood up slowly, taking a moment as if I needed to steady myself, then moved toward the hallway with unhurried steps. No sudden movements. No urgency. Just routine. I passed the office door without pausing, continuing instead toward my bedroom, but I did not go inside. Instead, I continued past it, toward the back of the house where the laundry room connected to the small side entrance. A space rarely used. A space not worth monitoring closely. I stepped inside and closed the door halfway behind me, leaving just enough of a gap to hear if anyone approached. The room smelled faintly of detergent and clean fabric. Ordinary. Unremarkable. Exactly what I needed. I reached into the cabinet above the washer and pulled down an old storage box I had not touched in months. Inside were things people tend to forget about. Old chargers, spare devices, a second phone I had kept from years ago, fully functional, rarely used. I held it in my hands for a moment, feeling the weight of it, the simplicity. No shared access. No recent activity logs they could manipulate. Just a clean slate. I powered it on and waited, my expression calm, my breathing steady. The screen lit up slowly, the system loading as if waking from a long sleep. Good. That minute had not been accessed. Not by them. Not by anyone. I connected it to the wireless network manually, taking my time, making no mistakes. Then I opened a browser and began setting up a new email account. Not in my name. Not connected to anything they would recognize. Just something simple. Something quiet. Once it was done, I opened a document and began typing. Dates. Times. Observations. Every detail I had gathered since morning, laid out clearly, without emotion, without interpretation. Facts do not need emotion to be powerful. I saved the document, then sent a copy to the new email, creating a record that existed outside of this house, outside of their reach. Only then did I allow myself a small pause. Not relief, just confirmation. I was no longer operating inside their system. I was building my own. I turned off the sound on the device and slipped it into the inner pocket of my cardigan, close enough to feel, hidden enough to remain unnoticed. Then I returned the storage box to its place, closing the cabinet exactly as I had found it. No signs. No disruption. I opened the door and stepped back into the hallway, listening for a moment before moving forward. The house remained quiet. Too quiet. I walked back toward the living room, my posture unchanged, my expression soft, as if nothing had shifted at all, as if I were still exactly who they believed me to be. Ashley glanced up when I entered, her eyes scanning me briefly, searching for something that was not there. Daniel remained seated, his attention on his phone, but I noticed the way his fingers paused for a fraction of a second. They were still watching, still measuring. Good. Let them. I lowered myself back into the chair by the window, reaching for the book once more, opening it to the same page I had not read. The afternoon light stretched across the floor, long and quiet, marking the passing of time without urgency. And as I sat there, still and composed, I understood something with complete certainty. They believed they were guiding this situation toward an outcome they had already decided. But what they did not see was that the direction had already changed. Not loudly, not suddenly, just enough to ensure that when the moment came, they would not be prepared for where it led.